Hey, welcome everybody. We are honored to have Jenin Younes with us today. She is a Palestinian-American civil liberties attorney. She advocates for individual liberties and has done a lot of important advocacy, including challenging COVID-19 related policies. This is actually something about you that to me speaks to your integrity, because I imagine when you were speaking out against COVID-19 lockdowns, which I imagine got you a certain following. And now when you're speaking about the free speech issues, about deporting green card holders for their political views, it's almost like you're speaking to a different camp. But it seems like you've stayed true on your values regardless of which side of the political aisle free speech issue is on. And that kind of reminds me of a Noam Chomsky quote, which I really like. If we don't believe in freedom of expression for people we despise, we don't believe in it at all. I'd love to just know a little bit more about how you look at it and how you feel about, A, what's going on in college campuses, and generally how you look at free speech in America and its importance.
Sure. So you're absolutely right that I got a certain audience during the COVID era, which was mostly conservative. Even though I'm not really conservative, my views are just all over the spectrum. I don't define myself in any category, but they did not agree with me after October 7th. And at first, it was less about speech. It was much more just about Palestinian human rights. But I pretty quickly, started vocally opposing Israel just carpet bombing Gaza. And so I, had to deal with a lot of hate. I think over the last year and a half, my following has somewhat changed. Like, I lost a lot of my COVID followers and have gained a lot more people from the Palestinian side. But I've been very surprised and disappointed, I would say, that a lot of people who advocated for free speech on kind of supposedly principled grounds during COVID are now taking the other side. And, as you pointed out, like, nobody thinks their own speech should be censored. No one thinks their own ideas should be censored. Everybody thinks that the people they agree with should be able to speak. So the whole point of free speech is, the whole theory behind the concept is that we have to allow speech that we disagree with, that offends us even, that makes us angry. And it's been disappointing to see all of these people who are supposedly principled. Now, of course, what people do, no one ever says, we're going to censor lawful, First Amendment protected speech. No, they come up with reasons. They say, well, this isn't really speech. This is harassment, or this is terrorism. And that's exactly what we're seeing now with the crackdowns on pro-Palestine speech. And it's what we saw during the COVID era. It was, oh, this isn't free speech. This is compromising people's safety if someone's telling them they shouldn't get the vaccine. So, I mean, the sort of theory behind the First Amendment is that the cure for bad speech is good speech. If someone says something problematic, you don't censor them, but you can counter it with your own speech.
Very well said. And I think it really does speak to people are often not as principled as you might think that they are. And we only notice this when the challenge switches to the other side of the aisle. These free speech absolutists seemingly are now like, yeah, deportation. They're supporting terrorists. Obviously, it's a national security risk, and then they completely switch. There was an interesting poll that came out recently, just this week, that said the majority of Republicans support free speech unless it comes to criticizing Israel.
Yeah.
Which I found to be fascinating. And again, their rationale is just like security, I guess.
Well, I mean, the craziest thing is they apparently are okay with you protesting your own government, which is obviously protected by the First Amendment, but not a foreign government. That's very, very strange to me and concerning. And I mean, obviously, they don't really, they're not real free speech protectors if they think that there's this exception for another country.
Now, one thing that, I hear a lot of people saying is Mahmoud Khalil, he's not a citizen, right? He's a green card holder. And the people they're currently challenging are visa holders. How does being either a green card holder or visa holder change your rights when you're in America?
Well, I don't want to speak to all rights because there are some where it's a little bit different. But in terms of your First Amendment rights, I don't think plain textual reading of the First Amendment means there should be any difference depending on your immigration status. So, I mean, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. It's been understood over the years that courts have interpreted that to mean any branch of government. the Constitution said that because the framers only anticipated Congress making laws, but the society we live in now, actually, the executive kind of effectively makes laws and also executes them, through executive orders and stuff. So that clearly covers any branch of government. That's a restraint on government. The whole Constitution is a restraint on government. It's not about the citizenship status of the person. And even if that were not true, I think a principled person who cares about free speech shouldn't be advocating for the deportation of somebody that they disagree with, somebody whose speech they don't like. I mean, if you really believe in free speech, you don't look for these loopholes like, oh, well, that person's not a citizen, and they're saying something I don't like, so they should be deported. I've tried to remind people during COVID that imagine if the government could have used the same justifications. For instance, someone who said the virus originated in a lab, which was considered a threat to national security at some point. They could have deported. I had a friend here from Australia on a visa who was saying that kind of stuff. They could have deported him on the same grounds. So once you sort of allow the government to have this power, it can quickly be turned against you.
Yeah, it's also the interesting thing about Khalil's case is that they're not even pointing to anything he said or did, right? It's just his association with CUAD, and they have some statements in support of Hamas, so there's guilt by association. It sounds like it's a very bad precedent and a very slippery slope. Do you is this being so? As a civil liberties attorney, is this being challenged greatly on a legal level currently? What's the battle looking like on the ground?
So it's currently in court. It was just transferred to New Jersey. The government tried to get the case moved from New York to Louisiana, I think in hopes of, for a few reasons, I think probably to sort of break him down by separating him from his wife and his lawyers, but also hoping to get a more favorable judge. Conservative judge might be more likely to rubber stamp any national security issue. But the Manhattan judge said no and sent it to New Jersey, I believe because there's an immigration facility in New Jersey, but there isn't in New York. And so his lawyers have filed a motion for a preliminary injunction. I don't think the government has responded, but they should in the next few days. I think it's 14 days to respond to a preliminary injunction, so something like that. And that's basically saying his rights are being violated right now by this detention and he needs to be let out. And of course, I agree with him. But, with respect to some of the statements that CUAD made, I think it's deeply concerning to the idea that somebody could be placed in deportation proceedings because of an organization's statements that they're affiliated with. I mean, I belong to the Federalist Society. I've belonged to the Heritage Society. I left that, but they make all sorts of statements I think are crazy and I don't agree with. Right. The idea that I could be in trouble for that is really crazy.
Right, and I mean, there's so many reasons or ways to associate with somebody that it's just very much the wrong way to look at it. Maybe this isn't the best example, but on my YouTube channel, I've platformed people whose views I definitely don't agree with, anywhere from Kahanists to neo-Nazis. And my rule is if I'm going to platform somebody with dangerous views, then it's fine as long as I'll challenge them on their views. But, people very much now, I get the claim that I'm an enabler of these views. Just, that's a similar concept of guilt by association. Okay. Troubling. I need to admit that I'm an optimist. So when Trump got elected, I'm like, you know what? I can actually see some potential here. I didn't vote for him, but I'm like, you know what? He's not beholden to the party. He's a narcissist and doing it all for his legacy. So maybe he'll try to get some good wins for humanity to be remembered. And then I kind of see how reflexive he is in everything he does, and it's almost very shallow in his thinking. The wins he's trying to get are symbolic, like Greenland. Let's get Greenland. Let's get Canada, Gulf of America. It's things that aren't necessary, don't make any difference, but will look good on his legacy. When it comes to this stuff here, I don't know where his cracking down on these protests is coming from. People pointed to Miriam Adelson, who funds him. It could be connected to that one. It's unclear what drives that. Do you have any insight into why you think he's functioning in this way?
So to start, I'll say like you, I was sort of optimistic. I'm not a Trump fan by any stretch of the imagination. Also didn't vote for him, didn't vote for Harris either. But
Same.
I thought maybe now something different. And Biden clearly let this genocide go on for a year. So, I'm not going to vote for Harris, who's said she's going to distance herself. But as for a read of Trump, I don't think I have one. I'm constantly kind of trying to figure him out. Sometimes I thought maybe he's playing some game of 4D chess. And then sometimes I think he's just an idiot or an ignorant person who acts on like his latest impulse or the last person he talked to. I mean, the best thing I can think of is his very close ties to Miriam Adelson and other people who are just deeply embedded with the Israel lobby. Bill Ackman, for instance, I know took, was sort of a number one issue for him. And I know he's fairly close with Trump. Some people say that that Epstein files have, there's blackmail on him basically. And so he's going along with this to stop the release of that. I don't know. I can't really say. It's difficult for me to understand. And I can say it's very disappointing because he's sort of positioned himself as the free speech president. And one of his first things to do was to sort of end the government's involved in social media censorship, which was my big issue. I was part of a team that took that to the Supreme Court in last March, actually. So he issued an executive order saying the government can no longer be involved in social media content moderation, which was great. But then this stuff is, it's hard. It's apples to oranges, but it's arguably worse because Biden wasn't throwing people in prison for their speech.
Right. Well, I guess we're seeing that he's just as principled as the rest of them. Not so principled. Not so principled at all. So we have an hour here on the clock, right? And I do want to give ample time for Q&A. I do have some other threads I want to take this in, but I do want to first give opportunity to see if anybody wants to chime in right now on what we're speaking on before we move on to some other topics.
I'd love to ask a couple of questions if no one else wants to go first.
Yeah, Adam, all you.
So you mentioned a couple of things that I'm curious about. So first is the distinction between Congress and the executive existing or the lack of distinction that exists in the Constitution. Is that actually like a door that people try to walk through? Or is that just like a terminological thing that's interesting for academics?
So to be clear, the Constitution does clearly differentiate between the two. I would say that over time, the executive has sort of expanded significantly, and the interpretation of what the executive is allowed to do has, in my opinion, kind of started to blur the lines between the executive and Congress. A lot of things that are executive orders, I think should be acts of Congress. It's sort of giving lawmaking power to the executive, but it's the system we have now. So what that just means is that a lot of times what the executive branch is doing is effectively lawmaking, which is why courts have read Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech to apply to the executive branch too.
Okay, courts have interpreted it this way, and has it been then the case that the executive is trying to say, well, actually, no, it just says Congress, It doesn't say executive, or people have sort of understood that to be a valid reading?
That's widely accepted because the executive also doesn't want to admit that they're making law because they're not supposed to. So they claim that what they're doing is interpreting the law, that the executive orders are effectuating the laws that Congress has put in place. But I think a lot of executive orders are really departing from the statutory language and limitations.
Yeah, sometimes I think folks from the executive saying that, well, those are rules, right? Distinction between a law and a rule. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And this is like the sort of growth of the administrative state that I think has been very problematic.
Yeah. Now, with respect to the case in Colombia, so what is the specific allegation against him that would sort of validate in their mind the justification for deporting?
So normally to be deported, there are like a few reasons you can be deported if you have a green card, and mainly it's for committing crimes, certain kinds of crimes, basically serious crimes. There are a couple others, like if you committed fraud on your green card application. But they're invoking a very obscure provision of immigration law that allows the Secretary of State to make a unilateral determination that somebody poses a national security threat. It's very rarely been invoked. Like, courts have only addressed it a few times because it's so rarely used. And what they're arguing is that because Khalil's views on foreign policy differ from the administration's, and they've specifically said their goal is to fight anti-Semitism all over the world, and by arguing for Palestinian human rights, Khalil is conflicting with that policy or contradicting that policy, and that poses a national security threat. So it's a very, very broad reading. And I don't think it's consistent with the First Amendment. And where a statute is not consistent with the First Amendment, or the interpretation of the statute isn't consistent with the First Amendment, then it's the statute that has to fall. Now, if you get, some judges are just very, very big on executive power, and like, the president ultimately has the power, and we're not even going to look at his reasons. So you could get a judge who just sees things that way, that this provision says the president has all the power. If he wants to deport this person, he can deport this person. I think it's hugely problematic and sets really bad precedent, but that's effectively what's going on.
So it's a risk to national security argument that they're making, and
yeah,
and they're making that case because of things that he has said, things he has done, just the fact that he believes in things that are orthogonal to what the administration believes. Or what I heard from some people is that, well, they think that he's like affiliated or promotes or is sympathetic to a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
That in of itself is criminal. Is there a difference there? Like, how does the law fall between
so
those?
It's all very nebulous, the accusations against him. And I'll say it wasn't clear at first, but I looked at all the evidence that people have pointed to, he's only advocated for peaceful solutions to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. He's never, that I'm aware of, has never made any statement supporting Hamas or October 7th or terrorism in general or anything like that. As we discussed a little bit earlier, he's loosely affiliated apparently with this organization, CUAD at Columbia, that's made some statements that I would call controversial. They're still protected speech in my opinion, but makes things a little harder. But there's no evidence he was in charge of their Instagram post. He knew about the post, he approved the post, anything like that. And as I said earlier, we all belong to organizations. That doesn't mean we agree with everything that they say. And it's not even clear how close his ties were. It's possible he just got on a mailing list for them or something. So nobody's pointed to anything he's done other than participate in the protests, which is protected, serve as a negotiator, and has advocated for Palestinian human rights. And what a lot of people have tried to do is sort of make these vague things like, well, other people at the protest broke the law by trespassing or doing these encampments or whatever. But he's not accused of doing this. And the administration has even said he didn't do anything unlawful. You can't attribute the law for accomplice liability is high. That's like when you're responsible for somebody else's conduct in a criminal manner. If you plot to murder somebody with someone else, then you're responsible for that murder to some extent. But a protest is different, where some people are behaving badly. There's no evidence he did. There's no evidence he enabled it, that he wanted it. Just by participating in the protest, you can't be responsible for thousands of people's behavior. That's just not fair. So the administration has fallen back and basically admitted that it's just for his speech, just for pro-Palestine advocacy.
Oh, wow. Have they said as much explicitly?
Yeah. So one of the latest interviews was with the DHS deputy secretary, and he said, well, this pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas speech, he was clearly conflating them. We can't have that in this country, this pro-Hamas. And no one pulled out anything saying he supports Hamas. Now, if he had said, I support Hamas, I still think that's protected speech, and the First Amendment trumps that. It would be, it would be more controversial to defend it. He didn't, and I frankly think the administration screwed up. They didn't look closely at his case before they did this. They could have, if they were smart, they would have started with a visa holder who'd actually said something like, I support Hamas, but they didn't.
Well, okay, so actually you open a couple of threads that I wanted to pull on. So one of them is, so a lot of people say you can't explicitly support a terrorist organization, or at least help a terrorist organization. Yeah. What does that mean in practice? Or have we seen any precedent of that? If I say, tons of people said that they support Hamas and they support October 7th in the US. Obviously, they're not being deported. Most of them are citizens. Yeah. Is that technically protected speech, or does that fall into some kind of ambiguous space?
No, that's protected speech. There was a case called Skokie in the 1970s where the ACLU sued on behalf of a group of Nazis who wanted to march through Skokie, Illinois, which was a town of a lot of Holocaust survivors. And the Supreme Court said that was protected speech. It might be very offensive. It was, not a happy event, but that's protected speech. So you are allowed to voice support for white supremacy, for
well, right, no, but terrorist organizations include,
just the speech, yes. If you give money, if you're starting to coordinate activities with them, that would be different. That would fall under material support of terrorism laws. But yeah, you are allowed to say, I approve of what Hamas did on October 7th. And I mean, I'm sort of a First Amendment absolutist, so I agree with that. I don't agree with what Hamas did on October 7th, but I agree that all of the speech should be protected. And I think the reason for that is that we really don't want the government getting involved in these determinations. And actually, I think Khalil's case kind of illustrates that. Because, what's the line? If the government, we don't need the government to draw these lines for us. We're adults, and we can counter that speech and say, no, what Hamas did on October 7th was terrible. None of us should countenance the killing of civilians, and you can support Palestinian rights without supporting Hamas.
That's what America's all about.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
America.
That's how we deal with these pleasant issues. And think about it. You could have, the IDF has committed horrible crimes, but I think people should be able to go around and say, I support the IDF if that's what they want to say. I support Netanyahu. I don't like the government or people sort of using these subjective ideas to say, well, this kind of speech isn't allowed, that kind of speech is. So, yeah, I think if you don't have another element that sort of is helping to enable a terrorist organization beyond just pure speech, I don't think that should be illegal.
Right. And Adam, real quick, because I just wanted to build on that point, because there's something very subjective also about how a terror organization is determined, right? You could say, okay, Hamas is a terror organization, therefore you can't support them. But Israel, doesn't matter how many civilians they killed, they're not designated as a terror organization. So not only can you support them, you actually can give them material support. You could donate to the IDF with no problem. So and I'm not making the case that we should be okay with giving material support to those who are killing civilians, whether it's the IDF or Hamas, but very clearly there's a very high level of subjectivity to how you define terror organization, and it almost gives I believe it is the executive that gets to determine who's designated a terror organization or not. So clearly, if that can stifle speech, there's a very clear problem with that.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with every word of that.
Yeah. So I think I'm probably as close as it gets to being a free speech absolutist as well. I'm curious about what you mean by so saying I support Hamas. You're saying should not be illegal. Is it right now? For example, do people ever still get busted for saying things like that, or historically that hasn't really been the case?
No, not that I'm aware of. I mean, there may have been an incident here or there, but I think it would have been vindicated in court. You can say I support Hamas. You can say I support Dar Yassin. You can say I support Kahanism in the U.S. I mean, that's just, and I think philosophically speaking, it's important to remember there's this temptation to want to silence speech that offends us. I mean, I have it too, and I've had to fight that instinct, and it gets easier and easier as I've become more and more of a free speech lawyer. But when people say things that are anti-Semitic or racist or offensive, shutting them up or making it unlawful, I don't think makes the ideas go away. I think it drives them underground. They just start to form chat groups where they're not saying it publicly. And that's why I actually think it's good to have these things in the open. Let them say it publicly on Twitter where we can contest it and where we can have a dialogue, or like this, I think we all want to think that shutting people up through laws makes the ideas go away. And I don't think that's actually realistically how it works.
Is there a difference between green card holders and visa extensions that is at all relevant with respect to free speech protection?
So my interpretation of the First Amendment, I would say no, because again, I'm looking at it very much from a textual perspective. The First Amendment is a restraint on government, and it's without regard to the citizenship status of the person in question. So in my opinion, the First Amendment applies to anybody on American soil, probably Americans abroad. It's kind of fuzzy, but let's just say that for now. I think practically speaking, it might be a difference to a judge, because judges are kind of, they're kind of practical, and I think they're going to have less sympathy for someone who's here on a visa than who's in the United States on a green card. Like if you're here on a green card, you're sort of taking steps towards making a life here. In this case, this guy has a wife who's a U.S. citizen who's 8 months pregnant. It's a bit more hard to countenance his removal from the U.S. than like someone who's here on a 6-month student visa or something. So courts might draw a distinction. I don't think they should, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do.
Thank you very much. I'll give some space for other voices. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
I want to, you made a very good point that when you shut down free speech, those ideas don't go away. They often just get stronger, but are growing in the shadows where we can't even engage with them. And I think generally this has been a mistake in combating anti-Semitism. There's this, the approach by many Jews around the world. Well, it's not even clear. It doesn't even matter what the majority thinks, right? What happens is you have a situation where somebody will say something anti-Semitic, and then the masses will come and say they should be deplatformed, assume the worst about their intention, do very little to try to engage them in conversation or maybe educate them if their anti-Semitism is just coming from a place of ignorance and not malice. And then what often happens is they get deplatformed, right? So they could say Jews have too much power and they wield their power irresponsibly, and then they get deplatformed. It's like, okay, did you not just prove what I was saying? And it almost just fuels more of the same. And I think that we see something similar with Khalil, that he's become a martyr. Most people had no idea who he was. Now everybody knows who he was. And I almost think that Trump helped the Palestinian cause with these moves. It's going to be interesting to see how this affects the energy of campus protests. It might decrease certain energy, but I think in total it actually put more energy behind this movement. Not to mention it continues to fuel these narratives that the government is bought and paid for by Israel and Jewish money. So I think regardless of what his intention is, it's certainly not. It's counterproductive, at least to his goals. One thing that I kind of wanted to pose to the room here, because we have a few free speech absolutists, while I'm also on that side, I do see an inherent issue with the marketplace of ideas, because truth actually has a disadvantage in the marketplace of ideas. So as much as I don't want to shut down bad ideas and deplatform them, I don't think there's such a simple solution in let's just debate it in the public, because constructing a lie is simple. You can make it as appealing as possible. It takes a single minute to do, and then to debunk it takes time. It's more complex, so it doesn't have the same broad appeal. So in the free market of ideas, truth often loses. So while I don't think it's a good solution to just be deplatforming, I don't think just this free marketplace of ideas is proving to help us get to the bottom of what is true and what isn't. And I'm wondering if anyone here has thoughts on that. And Jenin, I'd love to start with you if you have thoughts.
Sure. I mean, I definitely have sympathy for that point of view. And I actually think sometimes people say things online that result in, people tell lies and then other people believe them, and that results in real world harm. And that's obviously a problem. And the framers of the Constitution really couldn't have foreseen the internet. Right. It's just very easy to quickly spread untruths. I'll admit, I don't know what the solution is. I've thought about it a lot. I haven't really figured it out. I can say I don't believe in putting the government in charge of that. And look at the government we have now, or the one we had during Biden, which was actually coercing the social media companies we now know to suppress the lab leak theory, which most people now think is more likely than the natural origins theory. So I think that illustrates exactly why you don't want the government in charge, because they have political motives, power motives. But I'm not sure what the best solution is. I'm definitely happy to hear other people's ideas. So all I can say is what I don't think should happen.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, fair. Adam, did you want to chime in on this?
I think my perspective on this, right? I think that we need to create products that are built on technology that can help to facilitate truths to spread faster than lies. And I think that we need to create conditions where good ideas can thrive and bad ideas don't have to. And I think that what we've done is invest in the wrong set of like socio-technological products. So like Twitter and Facebook and TikTok, and I don't think they are promoting the kind of marketplace of ideas that is conducive to truth thriving.
Right.
But I think that there's opportunities to create better products. That's what we're trying to do here with Head On. So sorry, I couldn't resist, but Adar, that's
No, I mean,
that's
I gave you a very easy layup, so you know it's
Yeah.
it's I'm glad you took it. I mean,
and I do believe that like again, like I see a distinction between like underlying technology and then products sitting on top of it. And as the technology continues to change and to evolve, there's new possibilities for new products that can help us realize certain values better, like marketplace of ideas actually allowing good ideas to thrive. I think that AI and development in AI can be a net positive or a net negative. We're still up for seeing what happens, but it certainly is going to change the dynamics here. I think that our perspective here, Adar and I spoke about this, maybe like 85% chance we think that AI is probably going to aggravate the situation and make things much worse. But we think there's also a possibility that AI will help facilitate much better and healthier public discourse.
Yeah. I mean that's why we're doing what we're doing, you know. And hopefully the platforms today that are just dividing the world are just not, either they find a solution to change their product in a way that is conducive to more not only understanding truth but just more cohesion in society. But if not, we're just going to take the entire market and do what we can. But in terms of right now, like Twitter is where I spend most of my social media time. One idea that comes to mind, and you know, there's certainly flaws in it, but I am trying to think of how we can solve this. It'd be interesting if before you post, you get an AI review of your post that gives your content a score based on certain criteria. And the criteria should be completely public, that everybody knows and can even publicly debate. But if there's something that you're saying is that just very blatantly hateful, then that will affect your score and it won't get as much reach. Like your reach will be throttled depending on what you're saying. Another criteria is the truth of what you're saying. Now, some aspects of truth are highly contested and it's unclear how the AI will determine, but there's certain things that are just very blatantly just false at this point, and I think there's a consensus. And let's just take a very obvious one, like flat Earth, right? There's like we could just say that that's not contested. It's just, so if somebody says the Earth is flat, the AI will say, we know this isn't true. This has a score of C, which means your reach will be reduced by average of 70%. Or if you just want to say Jews are evil, again, that's an opinion and doesn't have to do with truth, but it's clearly there's no benefit to society tweeting something like that. So again, you get throttled. So it's almost like the AI will give you feedback on your post before you post it to incentivize things that are good for like societal cohesion and also accuracy. Just some ideas.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that approach that much. I try not to weigh in on things without having like mulled it over a little bit. But I mean, it's straight off the bat as giving a lot of power to AI, which is kind of makes me nervous. But I'll think about it more and get back to you on that.
Sure.
In a few days.
Look, I know you're rightfully nervous about giving power to AI. I think there's nothing we can do about it at this point. It's all a question of how do we, I guess we just need the right safeguards in place. And I don't know. I don't want to pretend like I even know what I'm talking about here. We're going into such uncharted territory. Hope for the best, doing what we can. Would anyone else like to chime in on what we're saying?
Maybe
Adam
Kunal is trying to say something.
Kunal, are you struggling?
I don't know. you might be struggling. Maybe I'll ask another question until somebody else wants to jump in. I think a lot of people have been seeing like this meme trending of, like, oh, first they went after the socialists, then first they went after the Jews, first they went after, like, it's all of this kind of like the Nazis gaining power, going after certain groups, but ultimately they're after you, right? But by the time they get to you, it might have been too late. No one else will support you. Now you better stand up and support others. To what extent do you think there's like a similar kind of like inclination by the administration to just like start by singling out, let's say, like Palestine supporters, but then ultimately really this is much more expansive, and now it's the trans rights people that are going to be, their speech will be chilled, and then any liberal, and then at some point even just this particular gradient of conservative will be going after. Like, do you have some sense of how this expands?
Well, I'll start by saying I've had a very weird political journey in that, like, when Trump got elected in 2016, I had been a Bernie supporter. I really hated Trump. I cried when he got elected for like 3 days and couldn't go to work. And then I had sort of a little bit of a 180, I would say. And I was so opposed to COVID restrictions that I sort of went to the Republican side. Like, I voted entirely Republican in the congressional elections in 2022. I don't know if I've ever publicly admitted it. I voted for Trump in 2020.
Breaking news right here.
And I spent like 4 years telling everybody that, they exaggerated how bad Trump was. I had realized that the Democrats had made up Russiagate and all this other stuff. And now I've kind of gone back. So I don't know. It makes me very nervous that what they're doing is trying to create sort of a very homogenous society, and what they're kind of doing is using laws to get rid of anybody who's like, not like a white. I don't exactly know how I exactly characterize it, but that a lot of this is like an excuse to get rid of anybody who's from the Middle East, and then people from South America or Central America. I'm nervous. It seems it's more authoritarian than I actually expected him to be his second time around, and I'm not exactly sure where it's going.
Yeah.
Jenin, I wanted to also talk to you a little bit about, like, you're Palestinian-American, right?
My dad's Palestinian. I grew up entirely in the US, and my mom is, her father was actually a German Jewish, I don't want to say Holocaust survivor, but he fled Nazi Germany in 1936.
Oh, wow.
So
you're okay. I actually like your mom's father.
So my dad's from the West Bank, from near Jenin, and then he immigrated here when he was in his 20s for a PhD program in linguistics, which my mom was in. She grew up in Minnesota and had like a white Protestant mother, and her father was German Jewish.
So you're almost Palestinian Jewish, which is a cool combo.
It's almost.
Damn.
Yeah.
So have you ever been back to Palestine?
Yeah, I went in 1997, and I really enjoyed it. We stayed in my dad's village for a month, but then we were going to go back at some point in the next couple of years, but then the second Intifada happened, and it got a little too tumultuous, and I never made it back. I'd really like to, and I was actually planning a trip for like 2023, but it's just too much now.
Adar, are you going somewhere? Because you just opened a door that I want to run through.
Oh no, I just knew you wanted to run through that door, so that's why I opened it. I was being a gentleman.
Thanks, man. Do you have some intuition about what the state of free speech is like in Israel, and in particular with respect to limitations or constraints on Palestinian citizens of Israel's speech? Because that's been a topic that's come up in this community quite a bit.
I mean, I'm aware that it's not great, right? You can kind of be detained for your social media posts and stuff like that. It's not great for Israelis either, from what I understand, like Jewish Israelis. I have to admit, I pay a lot of attention to what's happening in Gaza. My mind can only take so much. But yeah, and Europe is pretty bad now. So the United States was, I thought, the best, but the last month or so has just been horrific.
Adam, I have a little bit of insight into this. because I've been potential at risk here in Israel. So after October 7th, they made a series of arrests for people as little as sympathizing with Gazans, not pro-Hamas statements. And these were all Palestinian citizens of Israel. I don't know of any Jews who got arrested. I think what Israel is doing is they're trying very hard for there to not be infighting like there was in 2021, where you had both Jewish and Arab mobs taking to the streets, lynching. There were lynchings. So I think their way to combat this was to go really authoritarian and start arresting people, at least taking people in for social media posts. Now, a few months ago, they passed a law making October 7th denial illegal.
Yes, yeah.
And this was inspired by the law that makes Holocaust denial illegal, which my personal opinion on that is that just adds fuel to Holocaust. Like the fact that you can't question it makes people question it more. Yeah. But that to me, that the second I saw that, I felt like I was at risk because, and I guess the fact that I don't have the largest platform is currently what's keeping me safe. But I think I'm one of the few Jewish Israelis who is publicly talking about October 7th in a way that's very, very different from the official narrative, and primarily from a well-intentioned place. I want people to know what's true. I think, I think it's unfair to our people to not have these false ideas about their enemy, ideas that damage our psyche every time we think about them. And when I say these ideas, it's like stories about October 7th that the average Jew and the average Israeli believes happened that didn't happen. And if had they known the truth, it's not like they would feel good about October 7th. Obviously not. It's just it would help them heal from a very traumatic event. So, I'm the reason I'm saying this is because I'm coming from a place of good intention, but it's unclear that I'm even abiding by this new law, because what I'm saying is very different from the official government narrative. And when I came to Israel, I was wondering if maybe they'll question me for the first time. I have an Israeli passport. I never get questioned, but it's the first time I ever entered and had suspicion. So I am concerned about the direction of.
But with that, are you concerned enough where you think it would modulate your speech? Would you modify what you say?
No, not at all. Because, if they want to make a martyr out of me, it would just make my important message amplified. So I'm not. Bring it on. Let's make life interesting. I'm not saying I want anything to happen, but like that's how I would spin it to at least feel good about it. I was in military prison. In fact, when I think back on my IDF service, one of my highlights was military prison. I wasn't happy being there, but it's like, you get out and all good. So no, it's not gonna change what I say, but I want to recognize that I think I'm probably an outlier here and unique. And I also think that probably Palestinian citizens of Israel have a level of fear of the authority and institutions here than I do, right? So,
do they define October 7th denial? So if you say that there were no babies beheaded, is that October 7th denial, or is it just denying the whole thing happened?
No, so they don't specify, and that's the thing. So it's really up for interpretation. Yeah. The babies, beheaded babies is not what they mean, because right now that has already been agreed upon in Israeli society. Like most Israelis have come to understand that didn't happen. But like other things surrounding, I don't even know if we want to open it, but okay, whatever, let's open it. Things surrounding sexual violence and the extent to which it took place, and children, and the extent to which children were targeted. These are all things, and burning families alive. Like these are all things that the average Israeli currently has a completely false understanding of. And I understand why, because to actually understand what happened requires immense amount of research, but not only immense amount of research, also understanding how to understand what a credible testimony is, and what an incredible Wait, what's incredible does not sound like the opposite of credible. Is it uncredible?
Not credible.
Uh,
Incredible is
incredulous. Or
okay. Well, yeah, y'all get what I'm trying to say, right? So I don't like. I really don't blame Israelis for not knowing, but I think those are the areas where they don't want you to touch. And then another question is, can we talk about Hannibal Directive and what that contributed to? I don't know. This is, and if I'm to speak vulnerably, you know, there's a lot of things that have pained me since October 7th, but this is one that has, this has caused me to lose sleep at night because I'm just like, I see how my family's been radicalized and traumatized, and I see how like these stories that I have been able to convince my close family of a lot of them, but I see how it was eating them, these falsehoods that they believe was just causing them so much extra pain, more like an already so painful and traumatic event, and it was just making it so much deeper. And also just the concern with your government being able to just instill these beliefs in your mind, and beliefs that you're going to take with your grave with zero accountability, zero recourse. Like, I just find it so troubling. So it radicalized me to some extent, and I do think I am going to wait a little bit longer because I think the wound is too fresh. But at some point in the future, I am going to do like a full October 7th analysis. What happened, right? I want people to know what happened, but I also want people to know what didn't happen. And I will touch that at some point, and if it comes, it will come with backlash. If it comes with arrest, you know, so be it. But yeah.
Can I ask Jenin before you go? You're a free speech attorney. What does that mean, like day to day? Like,
I mean, I mostly do cases involving people being censored. So for a long time, for 3 years, I litigated a lot of these cases about the Biden administration being involved in online censorship. And I have a couple of clients whose names you might recognize, like Jay Bhattacharya, who's going to be the NIH director, and Martin Kulldorff, who are epidemiologists at Stanford and Harvard and had disagreed with the government's narrative on COVID, but had been censored online, and there was evidence that the government had been involved in that. So I basically argued that the First Amendment doesn't allow the government to use social media companies to censor people since they can't do it themselves. I've had some other cases too, and then these days I comment a lot on, I haven't had time to bring a new case because they're very time consuming, but I just talk a lot about what's happening and how the First Amendment case law and First Amendment text applies to the situation now.
Each of these cases can take, I imagine, many months, years, too?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been litigating the Missouri versus Biden, which reached the Supreme Court in March and went back to the district court. It's very complicated procedural stuff, but I've been doing that since 2022. So case is still going. They can go on for a long time. There are cases that have gone on for 20 years. I was actually just reading a case involving that INS provision that Khalil is being deported under. And that case, not Khalil's, but the one that's very similar, went on for 20 years. It's just crazy.
For folks who are supporters of free speech, what does it look like? What does the happy path look like? So what is success here? The government ends up having to pay fines and then being slapped on the wrist, being what? They
don't usually pay fines. And we have something called sovereign immunity, which means the government doesn't have to pay damages for a lot of these claims. But usually what you get is an injunction, and it's called an injunction and declaratory relief. So the court says the government violated your rights and they have to stop doing, whatever it is you want them to stop doing. That's called an injunction. And often the exact ask is actually very complicated. You're trying to figure out exactly what the line is that the government can do. But so that's mostly, so I think Khalil's case is very important, and others like him. I'm really hoping that the Supreme Court says the First Amendment doesn't allow the government to punish you for your speech, regardless of your immigration status, and that includes deportation. I think it's very, very important. Otherwise, we're looking at a very different country where anybody who's not a citizen has to be worried about participating in a protest or voicing any kind of political view. And I don't want to live in that country. I want to hear from people like Mahmoud Khalil and anyone else.
Anyone else want to ask a question or chime in before we wrap this session up?
I have a kind of a quick question, I think.
Yes, I do actually. So in the case of Khalid,
Shika,
so
can
people
you
are framing it that he was here on a
Shika, can you hear?
visa.
Shikana.
Are we having a?
Yeah.
Are you able to hear me?
Brad was speaking first.
Oh no, I can't.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I wanted to keep.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe there might be a bug, but you cut Brad off in the middle, so I just wanted to. We'll give Brad. Oh, she's gone. We're gonna give Brad the floor, and then the floor will be yours. So Brad, all you.
Okay. Right, but I guess I'm curious on your perspective between Khalil, the doctor from Brown, and kind of the one happening this week with Badr Khansouri from Georgetown, whether your perspective on all these cases, they're sort of categorically the same, or if there are any nuances that you've seen on a case-by-case basis that justify one or the other, and kind of the implications if a judge rules this person can be deported and another judge rules on a separate case for a separate person that they can't be, kind of how the courts kind of reconcile those two decisions.
Yeah, those are great questions, and there's a lot in there. So I haven't looked at the Brown and Georgetown cases as closely. I just had a very busy weekend, and Khalil's I got to look at in great depth. So my understanding is the Georgetown doctor said some pro-Palestine things, and it looks like his father-in-law might have been involved with Sinwar. Obviously, I think, classical liberal principles pertaining to individual guilt don't allow you to be punished for what your father-in-law did. I don't think that should, be a factor at all. And I don't know exactly what he said, but again, if assuming it's just purely speech stuff, I think it's protected, even if he said, I support Hamas, which I obviously disagree with, but I believe that's still protected speech. My understanding is that he only said pro-Palestine stuff. So, and again, I don't think there should be the fact he's on a visa, I don't think it should make a difference. I don't think the immigration status should make a difference. The Brown professor, I think, had attended Nasrallah's funeral, if I understand that correctly, when she was out of the country. Again, I don't want to say I approve of Nasrallah. I obviously don't, but I don't think we should be punishing people for that kind of thing when they're out of the country if they're not directly involved in terrorist activity. I admit that one's a little harder, and she was coming back into the country, I think, and they denied her reentry. So that's probably more complicated, and I don't want to, I think I'm less comfortable weighing in on that because I'm not as clear on the facts there and how some of those might be different based on the law. But as long as it's just speech, no other, sort of contributing money or taking direction or coordinating with a terrorist organization, I think it should be protected. And I know it's not saying someone attended Nasrallah's funeral and they that should be protected and they shouldn't be punished for that. I know that's hard for some people to hear, but again, so much of this is subjective, because imagine, an Israeli goes to Netanyahu died, goes to his funeral. I mean, in my opinion, Netanyahu's responsible for more children's deaths than Nasrallah. One is designated terrorist and one isn't, but that's kind of subjective, and that's just how our government works. So, and I wouldn't advocate for somebody to not be able to come back into the country because they went to Netanyahu's funeral. So that, I think those are the principles at play. But again, in the Brown doctor's case, I think it's a little fuzzier and it's a little less clear to me what she actually did. So I'm not going to say anything conclusive on that.
Jenin, do you have a few more minutes that you could stay on for?
Sure, yeah.
Sure. Okay, cool. Awesome, Shikana, all you. You're on mute, in case you're trying to speak. Shika, now's your opportunity. There we go.
My microphone has to be re-allowed, and I was joining another. So, my question was about, you're a free speech attorney, so that I don't know if you can speak to this, but in the case of the student that was sent out, he was here they're saying he was on a student visa, and therefore he that was what was revoked. There's that. Maybe I'll just leave it there because I forgot what the other one was.
Are you talking about Khalil? Because he actually had, yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Oh, he actually had a green card, so they had bad information. And from what I understand, when they came into the house, his wife said, actually, he has a green card, and showed it to them. And they said, oh, well, we're revoking that anyway, which is obviously much harder to revoke a green card than a visa. So I think they had some bad facts. I suspect that they would not have started these deportations with him had they realized he was on a green card, because that's really not the ideal. That's not the test case. But yeah.
Okay, I remember the other one now. It was about, so if statutes have been enacted saying that, Hamas is a terrorist organization, and if you support Hamas, I think, the way we've always looked at it is material support. And, I was digging into it the other day, and I did find an article. Maybe that was this morning. It feels like days now. But it was about how even sometimes certain speech can also be limited if you're using it in support of a terrorist organization. So can you speak to that?
There are a few exceptions to the First Amendment. I assume they were probably talking about incitement, and so incitement to violence is one of them. It's a very narrow exception, and it's like if you were saying you were basically directing someone to go commit an act of violence against someone else specifically, that would fall under a free speech exception. So I suppose if your speech, your whatever support of a terrorist organization rose to that level, if you were standing next to a Hamas member and said go kill this person, and they did, or even if they didn't, I think that wouldn't be protected. But it's very specific. So just making general statements. If you said I support Hamas, I think that's very general. It's not even necessarily clear. Well, what does that mean to support them? What do you support? So I don't think that rises to the level of anything close to incitement that could be sort of separately prosecuted under the law.
And a third thing I just want to add is that what about, because I'm starting to think of this in terms of determining law rather than actually prosecuting these people. By bringing these cases, you're forcing it into the courts in order to clarify what this actually means. And, to me, that's a very interesting idea, because what is the end of that? It's because, taking these into the courts, having it examined, having it argued, having a decision come about, that builds on the statutes, especially like these old statutes that maybe only have like one case or two cases supporting them. So, I mean, that's kind of a vast area, but that's kind of what I'm thinking it might be happening.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt Trump meant for that to happen. It wouldn't necessarily be a great strategy, but I actually said, I think I said it on Twitter the other day, that wouldn't be, that there could be a good outcome to this, which is sort of forcing these definitions to be put into the public square and having judges confront them. Okay, what is anti-Semitism? What is it anti-Semitic to advocate for Palestinian human rights? And maybe having some of the public realize, you can't just make these vague accusations and then get somebody deported. So I think you're right that having the courts confront some of these things and having the government make their argument might end up being good. Of course, I feel very bad for Mr. Khalil and his wife, especially since they're expecting a baby next month. It seems like a really bad situation, but something good could come of it.
Yes, and if it's a very bad situation like that, where people are going to be very sympathetic, then they're going to be paying attention to the outcome of the case. And I believe that part of the Trump administration's approach is to actually educate people on what our Constitution says and what our law says. And that seems like very trite when you're messing with people's lives. But I think that there's like a larger goal involved in that. I'm not sure what it is, but I just think that there is one.
I don't give him that much credit. I think they just messed up. I think that I think a lot of them are not that educated on the subject and just heard, oh, he's a Hamas supporter. Okay, let's just go get him. And they didn't ask anybody like, well, what's the evidence for that? What do you mean by Hamas supporter? And then I think it seems like they really didn't realize he was here on a green card. And in fact, the DHS deputy spokesperson who gave the interview where he just admitted that it was pro-Palestine speech he was being deported for, appeared to still think he was on a visa. So that was just a few days ago. So they still haven't even gotten this straight. So maybe you're right, but I somehow doubt they're playing like a game of 4D chess here. I could be wrong.
That's kind of the thing that if you believe enough in Trump's 4D chess, he could do any reckless, crazy thing, and it could always fall under the category of 4D chess. And I understand why some people want to give him more benefit of the doubt, and I guess time will tell how this, in quotations, 4D chess plays out. But you know, I think I agree with you, Jenin, that it's not as thought out. It's a little bit more reflexive and kind of throwing shit on the wall, seeing what sticks. The problem is that the shit that doesn't stick falls in our drinking water, and then that's what we have to deal with.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. With that, we'll wrap it up. Jenin, thank you so much. This was such an insightful and awesome conversation with you. I'm looking forward for us to continue to be in touch. Thank you for everybody who tuned in and who took the stage to ask questions as well. For those watching this after the fact, these are conversations we're doing a few times a week on the Head On platform. If you want to join future ones, check out that link in the description.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And I will also, for those watching this after the fact, you'll find Jenin's contact information below as well. So you could follow her on Twitter and just get in touch with her if you'd like. And with that, signing off. Thank you all.
Thank you.